In this lecture, we're going to be looking at the effect of crime on public opinion. We've looked at the media's role, the role of politics. We're going to sort of look at now what that effect has on the, the public at large. So we've looked at this process before. Media taps the public sentiment and broadcasts it. Politicians get the message. Politicians enact harsher laws. The public's law and order ideology is met. We've seen that in the past when we looked at the issues with the political system and also the way the media covers crime. If we follow this logic, it means that the imprisonment boom and the social damage that was from that is basically the will of the people. It's what the majority of Americans wanted, and that's what happened. The media and politicians basically only doing what the public expects or asks of them. So the counter thesis that the authors of the Politics of Injustice text are looking at, the public sentiment of crime, fear of crime has remained relatively stable and in tune with reality. Public is not consistently fixated on crime as a social problem. The public is not uniformly supportive of punitive criminal justice measures. The public seems to follow the media and politicians more so than the reverse. So the people, it's the will of the people because they've let it be that. You've had the politicians pushing this tough on crime mentality because the fear gets in the votes. We've seen the media push this high crime mentality, which is not the case. We've seen the crime rates going down because it makes people tune in. People tune in to see the crime. But that's not really the case and not the opinions of the majority of people. So the media overhypes the public's fear and concern for crime. When we see those fear of crime levels spike, it's usually due to some effect of media coverage and or major talking points by political officials, sort of stoking the fires to try to do things like get reelected. So 3 dimensions of public opinion that we're looking at here. Fear of crime, individual perception of victimization, how likely you feel like you're going to be the victim of a crime. Concern for crime as a social problem, whether you view crime as a priority that the government should be addressing. And lastly, the punitive ideology. So these charts look at levels of fear of crime. And as you can see, from 1965 to 2009, the level is relatively stable. It peaks a little bit during that high crime period that we talked about in the mid 80s through the early 90s. But overall, it's within most years are within 10 percentage points one way or the other from sort of the median level. When you look at the individual crimes that people are worried about in that 2009, it's things that could potentially happen. Identity theft, which has only become more common in the 10, 11 years since that. Having your car stolen, home burglarized, and then when you start getting to the less likely things to happen, being the victim of terrorism. Again, that was on the national mindset back then. Having your home burglarized when you're there. Some of these are more likely, but the main 2, identity theft and having your car stolen or broken into, are fairly common. So it shows that people sort of have a decent understanding about what types of crimes take place, what types of crimes they are the most likely to be the victim of, although it's still a fairly infrequent social occurrence to have that happen. With the exception of maybe identity theft, that happens a lot. It also shows that more people worry about property crimes, which are the more common type of crime, than violent crime, the rare type, the type that the media puts out, that's happening every day. Murder leading the evening news just about every night. But people don't really worry so much about that. There are some demographical issues associated with fear of crime. Women, non-white community members, elderly are the most fearful, when in actuality, as we discussed before, the most likely group to be the victim of a crime are minority males, particularly African American males. We see fear of crime in terms of age, be at a higher level early and then dip down 30 to 49. People are worried more about their financial situation, their lives as they're living them. And then as people get older, they start to worry about crime more. We see females more worried about crime than males, and non-white community members more fearful than white community members. When we look specifically at types of crimes, on the bottom chart, you can definitely see that groups of society that are more susceptible to particular types of crimes, like that featured in the chart here, are going to be more fearful about that type of offense. It's more likely that that type of offense has been that those groups have been the victims of that types of crime more in the past, and it makes them more fearful of that crime in the future. And also, we see some not just male female when you look at things like fear of crime in the Hispanic community. Part of that is cultural and the patriarchy that has been continued in those cultural groups, even in some in being promoted in some sects of Catholicism. And additionally, that group also represents a lot of individuals that have what we'll call questionable immigration status, and thus makes it less likely that they're going to engage the police when they are the victim of a crime, which could then make them more fearful of that by not having any recourse against the perpetrator. That's a big issue with police in the community. Not only people of questionable immigration status. That's whatever your opinions about that are. We're looking at the police's ability to investigate a crime that shouldn't be hampered by someone worrying about whether or not the local police, are going to report them to immigration services. They shouldn't do that. They should try to investigate the crimes that are in their jurisdiction that they're in charge of investigating, and let other agencies worry about the other things. It's the same thing, really, when you look at drug dealers. Okay, so they've had a couple episodes of Cops where people have, they call the police because someone stole their pot plants. Or there was one where the lady called the police because she was trying to buy crack and they sold her paint shavings. It's dumb. I get it. But that's still a crime. And if you have a population on the stupid level, it's funny to see that on a cop show, although we've sort of been reconfiguring how we view that program since it's been canceled in the context of 2020. If someone is, for instance, they have a pound of something, whether it's whatever kind of contraband they have, of marijuana, or they've got a quarter pound of cocaine or something like that, and that's stolen from them, you can't go to the system is kind of set up now where you can't go to the police. So your options are basically either eat it, which is not going to happen, go try to get your shit back, or go take somebody else's shit. The last two are definitely going to result in more crime and more violence. Whereas if you had the ability to go to the police and report this, again, I don't know that the police are going to be able to hand you back your drugs. In the long run, it's probably less harmful to the community to actually do that than to promote, not actively promote, but sort of promote by inaction, drug dealers to fend for themselves. That creates a lot more violence. So when populations are fearful, particularly of crimes or violence that has been visited upon them or commonly upon them in the past, it makes it more likely that they're going to be worried about the type of offense, because they have limited recourse to right the wrong if it is done to them. So while societal level fear is relatively stable, individual level fear fluctuates. So who is fearful of a particular time changes, but it sort of waxes and wanes. Some people are fearful for a time, and then that sort of goes away, and a lot of different things can affect that. It can be situationally specific. So right now, there's a lot of concern in Atlanta for the area of University Avenue, where the police shooting at the Wendy's took place. There have been several violent incidents that have taken place there. This last weekend, there was an 8-year-old girl that was killed there. 24 hours later, another person was killed in close proximity. So people in that area right now are worried about crime. They're fearful of crime more than they have been in the past. That means that it sort of naturally happens that other areas of the city might seem not as bad by comparison. So that affects people's perceptions of those areas. But there are a lot of when low percentage societal events like that happen, it makes people more fearful. So fear is not uncommon. It's stable in the populace, intertwined with demographics, situational, and fluid at the individual level. So again, counter to the media frame where they're basically saying that a lot of people are fearful all the time. What really happens is people are fearful for specific things that happen around their area or happen to people that they know or that look like them, and then that makes them more fearful. This has become more problematic in recent times with Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and things like that, where people sort of seek those things out. And if you want to find 20 instances of a particular type of violent crime happening every day in the United States with 300 million people, you're going to be able to find that online. So you can sort of create a false inflation in your mind, depending on if you're only looking at one particular type of offense and trying to seek those things out. So that those situational factors can be more vicarious in modern times with our ability to see everything that's happening all around the world. So it opens our minds to things, opens our eyes, but it can also make it seem like there's an increase in some of these things, when really it's not the case. It's just the increase in our ability to look at a lot of things happening in a lot of different areas. As far as the public concern for crime, it's again spiked by those events in the media or the political system, and you can see that right here. The three biggest spikes when you look at like late 60s or late 80s and then in the mid 90s. The first spike is the presidential election 1968, when we're sort of refocusing, starting the war on drugs, creating this other and the hippies, and it's the hippie others, and it's the rabble rousing people in the South trying to fight the civil rights movement. There's a lot of undue focus on crime as a social problem. We see a similar thing in the late 80s. Again, it was marked there by a brief increase in violent crime, but it's and that one again is related to drugs, which is why you see that the peak related to drugs as the most common problem, because it was basically due to the increases in those crack markets. We go to crime again being the peak point in the mid 90s, which is when you see President Clinton push to hire 100,000 new local officers. So the crime being a focus in the late 60s, drugs being the focus related to the crime, but again around the crack markets in the late 80s, and then again the push to hire the 100,000 local officers in the mid 90s in response to the brief increase in crime related to those drug markets in the late 80s. It's basically just the public sentiment is driven by what's on the news, what's on the Newsweek, Time, what people are sharing on Facebook these days. There's somebody sharing the same story, you see it on two different people, or something gets shared 100,000 times in 24 hours. There's a lot of exposure there, and so that can affect people's perceptions and what they're worried about. But as you see, the majority of this time, the worry about crime and the worry about drugs are both relatively low. when you look at the entire course of this whole thing. Um, Again, we talked about these things here just a second ago, and also to add one thing here, the issue of immigration has been a real hot button issue, really over the last 20 years, specifically in the same sort of context, being used as a scapegoat for promoting potential problems of crime. Um, it's not really been nearly the problem that it's made out to be. And a really clear example of that is a case that's referenced a lot, has been referenced a lot by some political talking heads, um, where a woman was shot on the pier in San Francisco. She was killed. The person that caused the gun to fire was an illegal immigrant. He had recently been released from a period of incarceration. He was homeless. He was wandering on the San Francisco pier, and he found a gun in the trash can. He didn't know the gun was loaded. He found the gun in the trash can, and through unintended consequences, the gun went off. He wasn't aiming it at anyone. He wasn't intending to kill someone. He found a gun in the trash can, and the gun went off. That's what happened. What is put in the media is that an illegal immigrant killed a white lady on the pier of San Francisco. Okay, so they're using and that's not a lie. It's just a misrepresentation of what actually happened. It's not the whole truth. When we look at popular punitiveness, one of the clear examples that we look at for that, clear measures of that, is support for the death penalty. And as we've seen with the number of states that allow the death penalty go down to now 28 in the federal government, we've seen the support sort of, again, wax and wane to where now it's around 50%, sometimes a little less than that, in terms of support for the death penalty. When you ask just blanket, do you support the death penalty or not, you get more support when you bring in things like life without parole, issues of juvenile offending, individual mental health issues. It can sort of change. So it's very impacted by local events that are happening, high-profile cases that deal with this, and even more so than some of the other concerns for crime. But again, we've seen overall support go down, and again, part of that, I feel, is the ineffectiveness of the system, the length of time it takes from the sentence being passed to the execution being carried out, and also the large amount of exonerations that have taken place for trials that have been held in the past. I think with the modern trial process, modern advancements in technical analysis of evidence, that would go down in the future. But the system in place is, I think, too problematic to sustain itself in its current form. I think it would take a lot of, if we want to maintain the death penalty in this country, it would take a lot of changes going forward. We've also seen a massive increase in these sort of get tough options and their popularity. We talked about a lot of these in the past. No bail, no parole, 3 strikes laws, juvenile transfers out of the juvenile system into adult court, harder prisons, more maximum security prisons, pushing for cheaper alternatives, a punishment alternative to save the state money, doing things like privatizing prisons, privatizing probation, also creating truth in sentencing reforms where you have a limited ability to be released on parole. And also, the big one is the mandatory minimums, and taking the discretion for what sentence to give to an individual away from the judge, away from someone that's reviewing the individual cases in front of them, and putting it in the hands of a legislature, making a law that may be written 10 years before the crime is even committed. Some of the sources of this, to the American dream ethos, stressing the individual choice, personal responsibility. Criminals have chosen their path, must be accountable for their actions. But are they? Are you making a choice when you are systematically undereducated, systematically persecuted by the system, blocked access to jobs, education, even job training? Are you making a decision based on those actions, or is that decision made under duress? We see deterrence, punishment, and control trump rehabilitation and social welfare for wrongdoers, because we've seen that some of those programs have low success rates in the past. But we really need to contextualize what is a high success rate. The bar at present with just punishment fails 2 out of 3 times after 3 years. People that are released from prison go back. Two out of every 3 individuals released from prison will be reincarcerated within 3 years. So our success rate for these programs shouldn't be 100% success or 75% success. Even 50% success would be high. If the programs, target the individuals that might have a chance at bettering themselves, and even if it's only marginally better, even if it's not even better at all, but we're targeting people that can better themselves and then have a positive impact on the community, it might be worth it. It might be worth it just to break even. We've seen the code of the streets mentality expressed in a lot of these high crime areas. We have sort of by any means necessary attitude, and you have limited opportunity. So if you're engaging in illegal activities to support your economic position, then you don't have the same recourse for solving disputes that people in legitimate businesses do. So your only option when somebody comes at you is to clap back. That's it. Either you're going to take it and you're going to be a punk and then you're done, or you're going to go take somebody else's shit. Right? Juice is a zero-sum game, and when you make people play that game, then the outcomes are pretty predictable. So again, the effect the media has a triggering function on these crime myths. We've seen target certain types of crimes with stranger danger crimes, crimes with sort of the OJ mentality when we saw the darkening of the face last week. Portrays the offender in the worst possible light, which one of the major issues that we've had with the cop show. You don't really the news doesn't really show both sides of a case typically, unless there's something especially compelling about the perpetrator. You're only going to see the media once someone is arrested. Basically, the mentality that rest her soul. My 85-year-old grandmother, when she died, used to be a deputy sheriff, and her saying was that if you got arrested, you were probably doing something wrong. That's not okay anymore. It wasn't okay then. But that's what the media does, is once the media sees someone arrested, once they do a perp walk, you're basically guilty in the eyes of the media until proven innocent. People that watch more news tend to categorize criminals as more punitive. They view them as the bad guy, almost in a sort of like the way you would see a novel play out or a movie play out. There's good guys and bad guys. In fictitious portrayals, it's the author's job to steer the audience one way or the other, or to let them make their own decision. But now the news media has started to do that. Since we've seen the popularity of crime stories develop throughout the entire 20th century into the 21st century, they need that good guy and bad guy to fill out their story. We've also seen the sort of started trying to highlight some of the effects that the media has had in overt and covert hostility towards minorities in those cases that they cover, how they cover them. We've seen more punitive people generally foster more prejudice. Again, because of the way the media covers it, because of who they're shown as the bad guy, they start to internalize that. Those individuals also oppose civil rights because the people that are trying to strive for those rights are the same people that they see on the news that the media is telling them are the bad guy. So why would I give more rights to the bad guys? There are um, a lot of the things that people bring up when they talk about issues, trying to, you know, reduce people's access to civil rights, to prevent putting more funds into educational programs, into job training programs in inner cities, or revitalization programs from the public dollar, are based on improperly collected crime data. So the reason that non-white community members are overrepresented in crime data is because that's where the police have been active. The police have been active in those neighborhoods. They've been fighting a war on drugs in non-white communities. And because of that, those people, those community members show up in the the crime data. So then if you take the crime data and say that, not that African Americans, for instance, are being over policed, you say that they're committing more crime, you have those numbers there to sort of back that up, but it's a fallacy in the way those numbers were created and the reason why those areas were policed more. So they're and it's been going on for so long that it almost seems like that's the normal. It's like a false positive. Um, if we wanted to find crime in any neighborhood, you can find crime in any neighborhood. It's just been over the last 150 years that the policing has taken place, specifically targeting non-white communities, um, and because of that, they show up more in the arrest records. They show the crime stats. Um, so then it seems like they're committing more crime. They're not. And it's a false narrative, created by improper application of the system for the last 150 years. This last slide looks at what people's perception is for the way to address the situation. And the basis of it is that most people believe the way to address crime is through social and economic issues, addressing the social inequalities, addressing the economic inequalities, structural inequality in the system. We can't police our way out of this. Some people think that we can. They're wrong. They're the minority in the situation, and I said they're wrong. You can't do that. Over policing is what got us in this problem. It puts an undue burden on the court system, which puts an undue burden on the correctional system. It starts with policing. Um, you have to change what we are asking the police to do, and then they can do a better job. They can do a more targeted job. But the issue of reducing crime through brute force, through zero tolerance policing, doesn't work. It might work in some areas where people don't value their rights as much as we do in the United States, but it wouldn't work. It only works. It's only been effective, not to say that it worked. It's only been effective in its task in areas where the populace is so downtrodden already that they just accept the improper police action. But it's not a solution to reducing crime long term in any part of the country. There is no magic cheap alternative that's going to be the police are going to be able to put on their utility belts and go out there and stop crime. It's going to take a multifaceted social and economic approach to address the issues that we have created, by over policing, by drumming up by increasing people's fear of crime, the perception of crime, the likelihood they think they have to be the victim of a crime. It's not going to work. You have to give people the opportunity to make themselves better and then make their environment better. Okay, so we've looked now at the issues, the political system, the media, and the public perception, how that interacts. We're going to move into some more specific debate type issues in the next couple weeks. But so keep those things in mind when we're looking at potential solutions for some of the issues that we're going to bring up throughout the rest of the semester.